Today I'm going to talk about how Strava traded user goodwill for nothing, really. Now, if you already are yelling, like right away you think I'm wrong, jump into the comments and let me know about it. And let's see if maybe I can change your mind, or maybe I'm just wrong. For now though, let's get into the history of this. Over the last year, I've written 4 articles about Strava. Unfortunately for Strava, they haven't been the typical kind of stuff we might do. Things like, I don't know, how to use a ride tracking app, or maybe even what's great about Strava. Instead, they've been about a series of features that has left everyone shaking their heads and just trying to understand what the thinking has been over the years. Those articles started almost exactly a year ago when news broke about a sudden Strava API change. Then after that, the next thing we heard was that Strava was suing Garmin. And then only about a month after that, then we heard that Strava was dropping that suit, and things were pretty quiet from Strava on that front. And in the middle of all that, there was a Suunto suit against Garmin also, but really, all that did was highlight how unusual the decisions that Strava seemed to be making actually were. Now at this point, things have settled a little bit, so it seems like a good time to look back and see what happened. How'd we get here? What did Strava gain? And what challenges actually still exist for Strava? And when you do that, what you realize is that this all actually started a lot more than just a year ago. So let's rewind. Strava started in 2009, but like most companies, those first few years aren't all that exciting. Instead, we're going to look at 2012, when there's actually an old article in the Velo archive. And in that article, Strava talks about sort of what's going on at the time and how big of a touch point it was to have launched an app not that long ago. And it's just a really good place to look at it because you also have to think about all the competition at that time. What was going on? iOS and Android had not been out for that long. They weren't nearly as established as they are now. And there was the Garmin Edge 500, but everyone hated it. And Wahoo was still years away. That meant it was the Wild West of devices to record an activity. And an early benefit to Strava was how open it was. You could look at whatever shiny new hardware caught your eye, or you could just use your phone. And you knew that everything connected to Strava. Then, once the data was in Strava, you also knew that everything on the software side connected to Strava. Whatever new website you heard about, you would know that your data was in Strava, so you could easily connect that website and get your data out to this new thing that you wanted to try out. What it did was make Strava this stable connector. You just knew that your data, once it was there, it was going to be able to follow you wherever you went for years. At the same time, Strava was building an early social network based on both support and competition. You knew that it was easy to get your data in and out of Strava, but then once it was there, you would get recognition for the activities that you uploaded. At the same time, if you wanted to compete, you could either do that against yourself or people like you in whatever category made sense, or even against the greater Strava user base. There was fun to be had there. Those two things made Strava incredibly sticky. Now at first, it just drew in the geeky types and the early adopters who wanted a sort of data security. And then from there, it drew the athletes who wanted to compete. And at that point, the snowball really started to roll. The social graph was growing, and you joined because your friends were there, because the people in your running club were there, because the people in your cycling group were there. You just joined because of the social aspect, and things really took off. At this point, everybody was loving Strava. That whole saying, if it's not on Strava, it didn't happen, that was around this time. Then in 2020, Strava pulled the rug out for the first time. The problem was that all that early growth was built on venture capital, not revenue, and Strava needed to turn the corner on that. So rather than developing engaging new features that pulled people into a paying membership, they instead just took the features that people loved and they locked them behind a paywall. So now all of a sudden, leaderboards, some of the mapping, and some of the training tools were all now paid features. The problem for Strava was that the world had mostly moved on by that time. The company was a little bit of a victim of its own success because the user base had grown so big that most regular people couldn't actually compete for segment bests. And so it was a little bit annoying not to be able to see your own time or your friends' times or times by category, but there was also just a lot of shrugging going on. And at the same time, the API was still open, so you could still move your data to another service if you wanted that analysis. And don't forget about the social network. That didn't go away at all. So Strava was still a connector and still a strong social network, so people didn't care that much. Then in 2024, Strava closed a big loophole in the API. Now, to be fair, this time Strava did introduce new features before making this move. Except the new features were AI, and nobody liked the Strava API. It was mostly just a reason to make fun of Strava, and it did not make people decide to convert. At the same time, you could still use the API to move your data to competing products and take advantage of AI there, or whatever else you wanted to do with it. So Strava closed that loophole, and with only 30 days notice, they locked out any competitor from using the API in the way that you wanted them to be able to do it. It was generally considered the absolute worst way to do it, even if it had to be done, and whatever Goodwill Strava once had was gone. People were pissed. That said, people did not leave. Instead, what happened is something that I have to believe Strava didn't really see coming, which is that, see, in the years between 2020 and 2024, companies like Garmin and Wahoo became major players with users who had picked sides. You didn't really bounce around from device to device anymore. Now your data was in an ecosystem. If it was Garmin, you were locked into that ecosystem. And instead of using Strava as a connector, what users did, and what Garmin and Wahoo responded with, was to create direct connections from their platforms to the third-party analysis software. So now all of a sudden, Strava lost this thing. It was no longer the connector. Analysis was really never the core of Strava, though. Being a connector was a little bit of the core, but the real core was the social network, and that was continuing to grow quite strongly, and it was really doing well. So well that Garmin decided to assert a small amount of control over the data that was being fed to that network. And in 2025, Garmin said that when data was uploaded from a Garmin device, they wanted attribution given to that data. Now, Strava responded by filing an unrelated patent dispute that we know was actually related because Strava went on Reddit and posted about it. Except that post seemed to mostly backfire. The comments on that were by and large negative. People were very angry that Strava was trying to assert ownership over data that was coming from somewhere else, and there were parallels drawn to the API change from a year ago. And what ended up happening was that after about a month, Strava withdrew the suit from Garmin and implemented the changes requested a little bit ahead of schedule. So basically, absolutely nothing changed other than making users really angry. And many of them pledged to quit if Garmin data ever stopped flowing. And there were some that even said they were quitting just because it was even discussed. Which brings us to the present day. Strava lost its user goodwill. There's not love for Strava anymore. And in response, they gained nothing. Strava did become profitable in 2020, at least from reports, they're privately owned, but that coincided with a global pandemic that absolutely surged user base. So they still have this problem, and all the things that they've tried to do to fix it have only galvanized that the real core of Strava is the social network, and the social network is free. So I have to wonder if maybe ads are coming. But now it's time for another call for comments. Would you leave if Strava got ads? Is there anything that would make you walk away from the only fitness-focused social media network? Oh, as a final note, I did reach out to Strava. I had hoped to give them the opportunity to explain some of their thinking and maybe let us know if it had changed over time. I gave them over a week to respond. They did actually respond just before I started recording this, but they were not able to dedicate any time to letting us know from their perspective how things have played out.